All right, we are live, and I forgot to put my camera up. Let me put my camera up. There's actually some art that I got done by one of
I
our local
was
artists, Frederick
yeah,
Gilmont.
I was looking at it. That's
Yeah,
quite nice, like Doc Ock, but
with guns.
with guns. Yeah.
That was kind of the idea I was going for with that character. Was kind of a it's kind of a character who's a Doc Ock with guns, kind of jumps. It's supposed to be a mixture of John Woo plus Doctor Octopus plus a cowboy. That's that character right there. Best way to put it. But
And
welcome, artist.
beautiful. Hi.
Yeah,
Hello.
that
My
was done by Frederick Gilmont. But I'm gonna put my camera up because it's camera
yay.
time.
Yes.
Yes. Scored with awesome sketches. No,
Cameras.
I will warn you, my internet is a little weird today, so I might end up dropping out. I hope not.
That's all right.
If I start
Sometimes it happens.
roboting, let me know. It just didn't want to click in, and I was like, come on, come on, come on. It's like it wouldn't do it.
Oh boy. But we are here now. We are all
Yeah.
here. We have a wonderful and excellent topic to cover today. Very broad, so I'm sure we're all going to have something to bring into the mix of dystopias and utopias. A very two very loved and explored science fiction settings, and I think dystopia much more loved than utopia in many regards. But where should we begin in all of this? Black Knight, you're the one that first pitched this to me as like what we should cover. We want
Ooh.
bring in the people into the fold. Why are we discussing this today?
Yay.
Well, it's probably one of the best devices to use, especially if you are writing science fiction and fantasy. And it's simply way too good not to be used. Um, we have plenty of examples in classic sci-fi and fantasy, even because you can like make no mistake. You can have like a magical utopia or a magical dystopia. It's quite easy to achieve. But of course, most of the utopias and dystopias are in science fiction, and they are useful for a reason because we as humans we like to dream of we always like to dream of a better future, and we are always terrified of a possible apocalypse, and that's not without reason because if we look back into history, we can see that many such collapses have occurred. Um, you can just look, and not that long, not that far away. Um, there are volcanic eruptions that could cause giant tsunamis, earthquakes, etc., etc. It's plagues, of course. Who doesn't like the good old Black Death and it wiping out like about I think 70% of the population. Was it 70%? I
It was
think it
pretty
was.
high. It was
Yeah,
pretty
it
high.
was insane. It was insane. So one day you are you're just like waking up. You're brewing your cup of coffee. You expect to have like a half an hour or some like 40 minutes of calm on your porch, or let's say if you're at some beach property on the beach, and then you see a giant wall of water approaching, and yeah, that's pretty much you're screwed. Yeah, that's but like dystopias can also happen without the catastrophic element. You just need to look. We have real life dystopias. You just need to look at the former Soviet bloc countries while they were falling apart. The leaders, the glorious party leaders, they are promising that the land of like the future of milk and honey is just around the corner. That real communism has been like almost built, and everyone will have everything. We won't need to work even. There wouldn't be any money, etc., etc. But I mean, how realistic do you think James would be one such a utopia with our current technology? Let's say.
Well, definitely you would
I
have
mean,
technological
writing. I mean,
assumption.
right in to write it. I mean, not in reality.
So, like, how would we kind of reach that through writing, with say in like a very similar technological
Yep.
world such as ours? Try to like reach a socialistic utopic future. See, the issue with that is when the more people you add into it, the greater the issues that overall any sort of socialistic utopia would face, because you'd have trust issues, you'd have consumption issues, you'd have labor shortage issues, you'd have many issues across the board that would all have to be met continuously. With our current technology, I don't think it could be easily achieved, but if I were to write it, it would almost be like a dystopia layered with a utopia, kind of like how you just explained, and it would be in
Yep.
the form
Yep.
of artificial intelligence continuously broadcasting to everybody. You don't all have to work, but this is the amount of work that has to get done today, and if you don't, then not everybody gets to eat.
Yeah, or not everybody gets like enough electricity, or you'll have to
Yeah, the
have like a
resources.
rationed food, rationed water. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's and the scary part is that there are certain persons, I should say, who actually dream of building it, and
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
Everybody wants to achieve the utopia,
yeah.
and that's where some of your best literary villains actually come from, is those who believe to achieve good, therefore it gives them a license to do anything.
Yes.
Yeah,
By any means
by
necessary.
any means necessary.
Yes.
Yes, and then that's
Yes,
kind
you
of
will be
like,
sacrificed for the good of all.
and that's
And
kind of at the heart of a lot of dystopias, is the by any means necessary.
yeah, like let's say the have you watched the movie Equilibrium?
Yes, I have seen that one.
Oh, this is a good one. A good one. Yeah. And it's a medically induced utopia.
Yes, I think that's been explored in a number of
Mm.
mediums, but I know Snow, your entire like your piece of fiction that you continuously work on with your magnificent series of books is
Aw,
all
you
set
took that.
in kind of like a dystopia, correct?
Yes, and one of the first things is you get really old, like me. Oh, just sorry, guys. And you had to go put that in there again because it allows you to explore these themes from your own life experience. One man's dystopia is another man's utopia. Frequently, they are, like you said, inextricably linked. Utopias can be as small as just a few people experiencing it, and the rest of you are in a dystopia supporting it. And these are balanced, just like you said in the example of equilibrium, where it's balanced between these two things that you have to accomplish in order to get just that right mix. a homogenous group of people that all agree that this thing is a utopia requires them to have values that they share and may even vow to protect them and uplift them. As a result, your utopia may be as small as just a certain group of people who decided they want this thing. If they are villains, they will decide that you have to have a dystopia in order to provide them with their utopia. And there's so many ways that utopias and dystopias are inextricably linked. A free society almost inevitably will have good and bad in it. And it will be almost equally stratified. There'll be some places where it's a little thicker or a little thinner. But freedom requires people to make decisions that are based on the good of their own selves, but also the people that they love around them, and whether or not you value freedom for other people as well as yourself. As a result, utopias and dystopias will go hand in hand, because when you decide you want a perfect world for yourself and you decide you don't care if anybody else has it, then that becomes their dystopia. And that's part of the crux of Watcher of the Dam, was bringing that in. That, as Black Knight rightly said, the party leaders probably had what they considered to be a dystopia. They had everything they needed. They had everything they wanted, and they had people doing what they wanted them to do. That is their version of a utopia. The rest of the country, especially those who were being oppressed under that regime, had a dystopia. And that is a real life example. And we saw it played out over and over again as the fall of the Soviet Union certainly brought that to light as we saw the systems in place. And yes, there were utopian elements in it. There were people who did well. There are people who, under each regime, regimes are supported because they offer a utopia to a certain group of people, whether it's everybody or just a few. And so being aware of that, I was able to write it in that some people consider the system to be a utopia. Those who are advocating for it, those who advocate for everyone to do exactly as they are told, and only certain people are worthy of choosing their own fate, they believe it's a utopia that the Watcher cannot choose his own destiny because he's too dangerous to allow that. It challenges their utopia. When we realize that there's always going to be a cost. If I say I would like to be free, I don't want to live in this utopia anymore, the chances are there will be an innocent somewhere who had nothing to do with the situation who is going to lose their access to the utopia they have so carefully created. Someone who benefits from it, a child or someone who had no part in the evil of the world, who is going to lose their access to all of their free healthcare and all of their things that they had because I want to be free and I shouldn't be forced to be slave labor to feed you and to take care of you. Now we have the idea of what happens to the innocent. They're in that utopia when it falls completely and the world is left in this chaos. When you realize that chaos and entropy are part of the cycle of life in politics as well as the real world around us, then we are more adequately prepared to fight for freedom and to require a moral standard of ourselves when we go into to ask for our own freedom, that we don't just trample over the rights of others as well. And considering these utopias and dystopias in our fiction or in our, let's say we're writing a not maybe science fiction, but it's almost always in a fictional setting. Why? Because we don't really want to get crossways with world governments that might hate us and might perform DDoS attacks on us, if we try to question their things. And as a result, we write fiction about it. When we write fiction, we are giving people the tools to think about these questions. Why is my dystopia dystopian to me? The world I'm living in right now, what does it feel dystopian? What would I have to do to make it a utopian place for myself? Or what would I have to do just to make it a free world? Maybe me demanding a utopia for myself is not the right thing for everyone, but I can have as close as I can to it. If my utopia includes the rights of others and the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all, then I can come as close as I possibly can and still have my freedom and the ability to demand more of myself than just to be catered to by a world that exists solely for my pleasure. And I think that's the promise of these stories as we go into them, when we explore these themes. And that's why it's so important why we're talking about this today.
Yeah, that's especially when we can pull real life inspiration from history, and we can watch certain processes, certain events unfold before our very eyes, or just go back and then simply watch old newsreels from the Soviet Union, and not just Soviet Union, like the countries of the bloc, the Soviet bloc. Um, Yet, even though we can find inspiration in real life, it's always good to use our own imagination when we are writing about the dystopia and the utopia, and try to, um, let's say, write certain warnings in, because this is one of the interesting aspects of both the dystopia and the utopia in fiction, that quite a lot of readers um, actually enjoy these for, because they can see the perspective of the author in it, and ponder upon the various viewpoints, and like I said, the wordings. Like, yeah, you may have this free quote unquote healthcare, you may have this free transportation, you may have this and that, like, um, free housing and everything, but actually, is it free? And who is paying for it, or who works for all of this? Like, who maintains all of this? Is it like some um, nameless criminal who's been condemned to serve society, the rest of society? So the chosen ones can have all of these things, or is it some machine um, controlled by, let's say, artificial intelligence, or another person? um, and how sturdy is the mechanism that maintains that utopia? But as I wrote it myself, I like to have this duality of both the utopia and the dystopia, that it's possible for a dystopia to become an utopia and the utopia to become a dystopia. I mean, there is like a very thin margin.
Now, it fascinates me because you said the word machine, and that really is critical to most utopias working. Whether it is the machine of humanity grinding away to create this, and are they fairly recompensed? Are they slaves? Are they people who are working but only because they have to, and they're not making enough to live? Are they nameless, like you said, nameless and faceless, so people can just go, oh, they work for us, so we don't have to worry about them? Uh, or is it a machine, like you said, that the promise of AI and technology, of a technocratic world where machines would do the drudgery so people could do the things we love? One of the most disappointing things, and I love AI and interact with it frequently, not as as an artist, I do not use it. As a writer, I try not to use any of it if possible. In fact, I don't even use Grammarly because I don't want it influencing my writing. But it's doing our art and literature. I wanted it to do my dishes. I wanted it to fold my laundry. I would like to do the art and the writing. I don't want it to do that. That becomes a dystopia for me as a writer and as an artist, to say, oh, the machines will take over your job, your human creativity. You can no longer hope to compete. Go do your dishes. And taking away, that becomes dystopian. So once again, it's the question is, can utopias actually be achieved? We look back, and of course that becomes nostalgia. Um, at things that we considered utopian. And I think that is as crucial for us as a society too. And the reason why it's important to write about utopias is to say what is appealing to us. What do we think is beautiful? And in Watcher of the Damned, we have several examples of this. In this, mine of course is a post-apocalyptic world, but not all utopias, dystopias are post-apocalyptic. My world is far post-apocalyptic and coming up on a backside of it. And there are utopic moments that show up on either side of the system. Even in the dystopia of the wildlands, with the destroyed humanity and the cities falling down, there are moments that feel utopic. They're talking about freedom, or they're speaking in hushed tones in a room together. For a person who is a revolutionary, that's utopia. To be able to speak freely and to talk without being afraid someone is hearing you, even if the world is falling down around you. Or maybe it's the sun is shining and there's this beautiful pasture. I can literally look off my front porch, and I made a video of it, of the goats eating grass, and that's my utopia. Suddenly it's me. It's a utopia of one, but it's a utopia. The clouds are beautiful, and in that moment, it's my utopia. But the same applies for that dystopian world balance, as we talked about it, the utopia on the other side. In the system, we have the insiders who are living in their hidden cities below ground, the beautiful hallways with the white columns and the flowing fountains and the little carved streams that flow from point A to point B with the little mandarin ducks in them, and men discoursing on great philosophy and playing chess, because they are the recipients of the utopia. And as they go about their day just playing guitar and singing and creating works of art, that's a utopian vision that I as an artist would love, but not at the expense of people that would be enslaved to make it possible for me. And so we want to explore those themes. What does it mean for me as an artist and as a writer to be have a utopia? Is it actually doable, or we need to look at these things, because most of the great ideas of how a country could be run sprang from the ideas of utopias.
Yes, it's I don't know if you watched like early Star Trek.
Yes, absolutely. My favorite. Yay.
It's well, some people might call it space communism. I would like to use the term post-scarcity society, because they have, and it's like it's a loose thing, because it depends, it varies greatly, but they have certain technology like magic tech devices, like the replicator and the teleporter, and what was that other thing that they had?
Well, the transporter, the replica, the holodeck.
No, the holodeck is quite possible, but the transporter and the replicator were their Magitech devices.
The scanners, the health scanners, where you just go boo boo. Like
the scanners are all I mean, the scanners are possible. That's we have stuff right now that is quite close to that.
Yes.
But they wouldn't, like, their society wouldn't be the utopia, the level of utopia that they are, without the transporters and the food replicator. And it's not just a food replicator; it can actually create clothes and material, like building materials and everything. So it's like, what happens when they have probably unlimited energy, because they have better antimatter reactors, and this they use to charge the transporters and the replicators, so they can manufacture limitless amounts of food, clothes. Like, you why would anyone pay for that? Because it's like you don't even have to push buttons. You just say, replicator, give me shoes, give me new shoes, and the replicator will give you new shoes. Or I want um, T-bone steak, medium rare, with whatever sauce. I don't know. So it's at one side it does look like a utopia, but on the other side it's dystopian, because yes, you have limitless access to all sorts of goods. You don't have to work for them. um, you will never go hungry, but it's not real. There is like it's soulless. It's the food is not prepared by another human being. It's just resequenced energy, and it has a different taste than real food, than real food made from real meat and real vegetables, etc. And then you have the transporter paradox, which actually says that yes, you go from point A to point B in a snap of a second, but you're not actually you. It's just another version of you that's been reassembled by the transporter, and your original you, you no longer exist. You have been disassembled by the transporter. And
I agree with you on this, because it's
yeah,
and yes, in that way you're saying out in space this is a utopia. What is it like on Earth for a person who may have been a craftsman? What do you do when you have the replicators? Are there farms? Are there anything now? As the world of Star Trek expands and from the original vision that Gene Roddenberry had, we start to explore some of those themes. They frequently end up on planets where there is no technocratic world or no technocratic government, and so they become connected once again to soil, to Earth, to actually speaking to each other in human terms, as opposed to just militaristic rank. And they do go into those themes, and they start to explore that actually during Gene Roddenberry's period, where he actually starts exploring that, because and of course, to understand Gene Roddenberry, you understand that he's a bomber pilot, or excuse me, he's a fighter pilot. Actually flew, it was a pilot out there in World War II. Ladies' man, definitely. We all know that part. But he was coming through that period of consumerism, and where suddenly the world is explosively pro-American, and everybody seems to have everything they want after a war and terrible famine during the Depression. And so you explode into this world of seemingly unlimited consumer items and food and things. And this is reflected in that vision of the early Star Trek episodes from the original series. As Gene goes further into these themes, he begins to explore what it means to be in contact with real items versus the soulless items that are out there. What it means to actually be in a world versus just being a tourist on a holodeck or something that recreates it for you. And those themes do start to resonate as we go through the rest of the franchise of what is real and what is not. What does it mean to actually make something with your hands as opposed to just snap your fingers and it's there? What's left except war if all you're doing is just feeding yourself out of thin air and you don't have anything to do except explore? And it is a utopian paradise for those who want to simply explore, to go further, to go faster, to see new things. And that is where the energy is expended in Roddenberry's universe, is not in creating food or in sewing dresses or even being really anything except maybe a human living in that space. The whole energy of Roddenberry's vision is in exploration, in moving constantly outward, being supported by that. A seafaring nation, much like the Phoenicians of old, the Federation becomes that. And to me, more than a communist vision, it is more of that entrepreneurial a guild almost, where they are a federation of, and all they do is they're expanding outward, constantly expanding outward, looking for new things. And so in that case, that utopia celebrates and supports that, setting people free to go further and further into the cosmos, it would work. But the idea of being settled in on a world and simply being nothing because you don't have to work for anything, yes, it becomes a dystopian vision.
Yeah, it's one of my it's how one of my old friends always like to say that depends on what you are in that universe. um in many cases your existence is simply death of the soul, because you want for nothing. You don't have to actually um, struggle to achieve anything. As we mentioned, like, if all of your needs are met, you don't have to work for that. And it quickly becomes unimaginably boring, and it kills the spirit, it kills the human spirit. And that's why when you mentioned, it's like, yes, it's fine, it's utopian for the people who explore, because they're not like, they have been unbound from this perpetual boringness of just living, existing somewhere, in the total comfort of that technocratic utopia. They actually get to travel and see new things. Yes, if you're a regular civilian and not part of Starfleet, you can also visit new things, but you can visit things that they're not new. They have already been explored. And you're probably going there with millions upon millions of other people, and it's you're just another, pretty much you're just another NPC.
James, I think, go ahead, because I see you thinking. I see your wheels turning, James.
Often what we see in all these forms of literature, one thing that we get a lot. Give me a second. I actually got a fan right here. I can hear it blowing. I'm turn that on.
Yay.
One thing that we often see in the whole utopia, or I should actually say dystopia mindset, is that we don't actually achieve dystopia without the continuous push to try to succeed and make a utopia. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, where it's almost like an continuously trying to solve problems to create this new beautiful world, but by doing so you extend too much of the world you already have. Instead of going upwards, you go downwards. And there's actually one thing that we brought up was the Star Trek Replicator, which reminded me of a real life event. I forgot exactly where, but there's this place that was once in need, and so much goods from overseas came over and just flooded this place.
Africa?
It may have been Africa. It was already kind of a dystopia, but then once all the goods started coming in, there was so much access of everything that it was basically impossible for anybody to open up a business or to try to make some form of income. Their entire economy basically just stalled because there was too much free stuff that their economy started crashing in itself. And I think that's an interesting form of dystopia we don't see, is a dystopia of excess, too much, even though I think that's probably is a real life dystopia and extremely achievable within our age, is having too much. And we ourselves, maybe in the first world, deal with this excess of too much, maybe like too much thoughts, too much everything coming from all sides. Because a dystopia doesn't have to be a society that's completely crumbling. It essentially has to be a nightmare of a society to a degree. And in my own world, I kind of created that, and it was a dystopia surrounded by a bunch of essentially flourishing kingdoms, but they didn't mind that this one area suffered because their suffering provided them something which allowed their economies to and their cultures to flourish. So I think like dystopia, when we think about it, the downfall, and utopia, kind of the rise of a society. We compared the show Star Trek, one that I actually think is more utopic in the sense because at the center of a dystopia is that nightmare. But when we're talking about how Star Trek in itself can be a dystopia because there's this loss of purpose amongst the individual, because purpose also often comes through striving. I think its counterpart, which Black and I were speaking of, was Stargate, and in that sense, it's Earth moving towards a utopia because every time they go through quote unquote the gate, it's for a reason. They need something. They need a technology. They need this and that to defend themselves from an ever-growing threat that just presented itself that could destroy the entirety of Earth. And if you watch that show in comparison, instead of them dealing with issues of their utopia slowly kind of presenting itself as a dystopia, they slowly become more utopic as they go. They start from a place of what are we going to do? Then they become this big, I guess, intergalactic power. And with that comes
they become a force of hope.
A force of hope. And it leans more towards utopia. And I think that often comes with your starting point in the story. Because if we're going to talk about, say, if you're leaning towards one or the other in the story, maybe you're not post dystopia, maybe you're not post utopia, or you're one or the other. You can kind of head in the opposite direction. You know, like Stargate wasn't a dystopia, it was just a plain old society that dealt with this magnificent threat that they rose to a utopic level of power. Well, in Star Trek, you know, it's always supposed to be this utopia, but as they continue, they add in these various elements that start making it very dystopian.
Yeah, it's what was that other thing in Stargate? Oh yeah, they were like you said in the beginning, they were pretty much doomed. They had nothing, and they could probably rely on some former slaves to help them, and these people were, we have sticks. That's it. We have sticks. But in Stargate, they kind of like, we are not going to lie down. I mean, we may have nothing. Our weapons may not be like super effective, but we'll not surrender. And in as we watch further, like in like the newer shows, we can see that many of these former slaves, they have kind of like progressed, advanced, crawled out from their like torturous, ruined civilizations, and they have kind of improved. And all it took was like the stubborn O'Neill and company who simply said like, no, screw you, we're not going to bow down. You can shove your slavery up where the sun don't shine, like like you can kill us, but we'll still be free. And the slaves was like, wait, someone actually someone is actually willing to die and not be slave. Hey, wait a minute, that's a great idea.
Yes, that moment of inspiration when you see it, when you say there's that moment of inspiration where you realize that somebody actually is thinking what you don't dare to think, what you had not hoped to think. And I was listening to you guys talk about Stargate. Browning has a beautiful quote. It's actually from his poem, and it's titled, I better get this right, Andrea del Sarto. And he says, but man's reach should exceed his grasp. But what's a heaven for? We have to have the ability to exceed from where we already are. A world that is filled with everything we need and nothing for us to achieve becomes flat and lifeless after a certain point. It's something that I've discussed with my mother as she was dying. She had always been very, very busy. And as a child, she had nearly starved to death, nearly died several times. She lived in a dirt floor shack. As a child, picked cotton as a 5-year-old and was beaten for not getting it picked quickly enough. Was a sharecropper in the South in the 1930s. And when she was lying there, she was like, I can't get up now. I can't, I don't want to be in this bed. I need to get up, move. I said, I want you to go back in your mind to that place where you were so tired and you wanted to just lie down for just a little while and have somebody bring you your food and have someone bring you your clothes and help take care of you and do your hair every day. And just pretend for just a minute that you were in that place and you had what you needed. And she said, but I've had what I needed. Now I want to be able to do and to achieve. There's that balance between the two worlds of a person who is truly hungry and suffering that would just like to lie down for a while and have people take care of them, to not have to do the dishes yet again, to not just get up and immediately get to work, to just try to maintain a stasis and keeping a house livable, to be able to rest. That is a utopia. But to stay there becomes disability. It becomes entrapping. And we as humans feel that. We as humans become that. We need to be able to get up and be ourselves, even if we cannot move physically, to be able to achieve something just beyond our reach, something that we might not get unless we try. And that, even just the hope that it is out there becomes such an extraordinary, elevating element in our lives. And that is hope. Hope. Because when you reach for something that you may not be able to attain, when you're hoping that you can go to work and you will get that raise so you can buy that car that you needed so you can go a little further in life so you can be what you need to be, that's hope. That's that achievement. With hope becomes an elevating element that takes us to that level of utopia for us. And as a society, we need that as well. And I believe that is one of the critical elements we are missing right now in our societal discourse, is the idea that hope, that things will actually be better. We are living in such a fearful state on both sides. And I agree that there are times fear must be done. You have to be able to say, this is a threat. I must meet it. But we also must have a hope that beyond the threat lies what we seek, that utopia that we hope will be there for us. And when we achieve beyond what we thought we could, or when we have something to strive for in the midst of our suffering, that is hope. And that is what is necessary to keep a utopia from becoming that dystopia that we talked about.
Yes, that's the idea that you can have like certain layers, utopian layers, in every society, even if it's like a post-apocalyptic setting. That's probably one of my favorite things to think about and write. And that's why I like I mentioned earlier when we talked, James and I talked before the stream. It's one of my oldest stories, which is both dystopian and utopian. It was written 24 plus years ago, and I have expanded upon it and upgraded it so to speak, and eventually it became part of my Star Shutter universe because it fit perfectly. So what actually gave birth to this story was me reading one of the, back in the day, prominent futuristic magazines, which they always wrote articles about technological advancements, new technologies, new discoveries, and yeah, it's always interesting to read this, especially when you're interested in science fiction. So I read a huge article about nanotechnology, and immediately after I finished the article, I was struck by the nagging suspicion that someone, if you actually had this technology, someone somewhere, some sociopath, some authoritarian sociopath might wish to use it to control other people so they could have everything while everyone else is pretty much a slave. And I wrote the first page, and then I rewrote it because I thought more, and eventually it became this crumbling city which was surrounded by pristine nature, a city where the air and everything else was already polluted, but the government was telling the people, it's fine, everything is fine, you're living the best life you can live. Don't go outside the city. This everything else outside is deadly. It's the air is poison, the water is acid. There is no life outside of what we provide to you. You live life aplenty. And I managed to create that contrast, that there were people who were actually working in death camps, in labor camps outside, and they were their slave labor was providing food for the city dwellers and the top government brass, so they can have their utopia. But after everything, almost everything had collapsed, all of these slaves, they found themselves free and living in pristine nature with game in the forests, their farms that they have been working, and all the food that they can produce. So I won't spoil everything, but some of the nanotechnology elements kind of mirror what actually happened during the coup, because they keep the population in check with these nanites, which they say that yes, this is the ultimate form of protection. You will never get sick. These nanites will protect you from everything, and you have been marked to be a model citizen. And those who do not have these nanites, they are these filthy, disease-ridden fools who deserve nothing. They may not even have the scraps of your table. You're free to do with them whatever you want. And there were there is an under layer in this last city on the planet, where you have these unmarked people who are kind of surviving on the scraps of what is the elite city dwellers discard. And but even though they live in strife, they have one thing that these pampered city dwellers do not. They are free.
And
they may live in squalor, but they are free.
Well, that once again, we talk about the concept of utopia is bounded by the experience of those who are seeking it. When you long for freedom, utopia is simply being free, with all of the chances that you might be living in substandard housing, or maybe you aren't quite fed all the time, but you're free. That's what you wanted. And this is why it's so critical that we look at both elements of utopianism and dystopianism as being part and parcel together. And there are, in a free society, each is allowed to try to find their own utopia. It is not a collective. It is not we all must have exactly the same thing and therefore we will all achieve it, but rather that in your own household, you might achieve your utopia within the boundaries of a free and fair society that would allow for instance, thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not bear faultlessness against your neighbor. But outside of those constraints of the simplest of laws, that you would be allowed to create your own utopia. And if it is simply you, by yourself, staring at your pasture and loving it, then you have achieved your utopia. Or if it is you marrying someone and having children, then it is your own utopia. We very rarely think of utopias as being an individualistic form. Part of that is because of the age in which we first really started exploring utopias is sort of on that pathway towards greater governments of larger elements, the communism being rising at that same time that we start talking about them. But there is the potential for exploring individual utopia, our own. And when we make it achievable for the individual to create their own utopias in their own worlds, you are setting free a society to become what they can be without everybody being on board and without everybody changing the world in exactly the same manner and exactly the same way. And I think that reimagining this was part of the Watcher of the Damned. Is I wanted them to be able to say, I have this dream for myself. I need to be free in order to achieve this dream. But it may not look exactly like everyone on my team's imaginings. Therefore, I need to be an individual and I need to be able to have my own things. And that is utopia to me, that a person might have the freedom to choose such a thing. And so these utopias reflect their creators. And as each of us explore our own version of it, and you and I have talked about it, Black Nile, but James, as you look at your utopia, because you're looking at it from a younger perspective, what does your utopia and your world look like? What is it? Does it have the collective feel? Because I think there is a longing for everybody to be on the same page, especially with people that are growing up in such a chaotic world where people are striving constantly against each other. The idea of a unified ideal. Where do you see your utopia in this concept?
It's funny that you asked that because we got a question in the chat, one of our first questions here. Because utopia is more than one thing, I think there's a variety of ways that you explore how that was one that he asked afterwards. But I'd like to know what's the most difficult thing about making it a dystopian society. And I think, you're talking about utopia, dystopia. I think it's less about the society, more about the culture. The society in itself would be the utopia or dystopia, and it would be the person of the culture who's in it who would essentially be forced to do that which is against their own culture, that for which is against them. And for a utopia in my world would be very much like that, because my world is split into three ridiculously different cultures, and one utopia for a singular culture would automatically be a dystopia for the two others in general. So it is a variety and a big balancing act. So I don't think there's a singular utopia for anybody within my world. Like I said, it just crushes everybody else within there. But what are your guys' thoughts on this question right here? What do you guys got?
Well, the most difficult thing it has to be, even though it's a dystopia, it has to be it's at a certain level. It has to be a functioning society, um, because otherwise they wouldn't have reached that dystopian level and have a society. Like we are not talking about uh, some situation where there is no society at all, nothing, just like, let's say, a few people lost in the wilderness or something, barely surviving. So his question was, um, exactly how difficult it is to make a dystopian society. So it's the most probably difficult thing is how you will think of these nearly broken mechanisms who are still operating at some level, and how will these members of society interact with said mechanisms. We're talking about, let's say, some sort of a bureaucracy, or maybe some sort of technology that is still barely functioning, or even in some cases the food and water situation, which could be, like in the case of Mad Max, under the control of some warlord, and the entire society would be, um, like, everything that happened in that society would be dictated by the whims of said warlord. But it still has to function on some degree. Otherwise, that dystopia would no longer exist. So that's not easy to pull off. Have to think about it. You have to um, to know of certain things, especially back in history, that happened, certain events, and these are events when civilization basically either crumbles or is slowly recovering from such an event, like a crumbling of everything, falling apart of everything. So yeah, in my mind, this is probably the most hard thing to do.
And
Yeah.
he gave us a little expanded alternate question. In creating dystopia or utopia, be it positive or negative, what is the most creative idea you come up with in the stories you've made? You want to tackle that one, Snow?
Hi, first of all, hi Sammy. Hi. He's an artist. He's really good. Um, and one of the things I think is the most creative way that I could do it is me wrapping my head around the idea that the villains' utopia actually is pretty awesome for them. It's very, very nice place, and I wanted to make it beautiful. In creating a place where the population, it wasn't, it's not a racial homogeneity. It is a status. It is meritocracy in a certain sense, but it's based on a person's status prior to the apocalypse. And so you have this utopia of people that are able to do what they want, and all these beautiful things that they're creating, and a world that really is a tragedy to lose some of the things that will go with it when my characters finally achieve their freedom. And they're going to run into this as they go forward. As a spoiler, as we delve into this, when they enter that, when you enter a utopia, even if it is your dystopia, if it is your oppressor's world, you see the beautiful things and you think there were humans living here. There were actually people. There's somebody who will be damaged because I want what I want. And you have to decide you still want freedom. You still love it. You deserve it as much as they do. How do we balance that? And that creation, that there was a difficulty in that, because seeing the balance and being able to rise up and say, I still deserve this thing. You don't have a right to oppress me just because you are making beautiful things, or just because you have great ideas. That dichotomy of being able to see the dark and the light of all of it and still choose freedom for myself and for others around me. And in the case of my main character, of him being able to teach a person that is not really able to say that she wants to see somebody else suffer, even if she would like to be free. To be able to introduce that character as that person that is not sure if it's worth it to hurt somebody else in pursuit of freedom and pursuit of her own way. I had to be creative in that because I know this person intimately because it's me. I having had a chance to at one point being assaulted, I said having a person try to assault me, and I when I'm on my own and I'm by myself and somebody's trying to assault me or they're trying to hurt me, I almost always will start talking. I could have a gun right with me and I still go, let's talk, let's see this. I don't want to harm somebody else. I don't want to do that thing. I can, by golly, somebody comes after my kids, I will shoot them, and I mean that sincerely. But it's just me. I'm always like, is this really worth it? Am I really worth it? Do I deserve to have this thing just because somebody else is going to suffer? The watcher had to explain to her why it is so important to stand up for yourself, even if this other person might lose something. Yes, they're human and you'll feel bad for them, but you deserve it too. You deserve to be free. You want to be free and you have to fight for it. And to be able to introduce that in a creative way, it was really a challenge for me because I wanted to answer my own questions. And being that person and having been raised by men who actually believed in fighting for freedom and having my own father have this discussion with me, I realized that was the way to do it, was not to just have one character that does all the talking about it, but to actually have my characters discuss and argue with each other about how do you achieve that utopia of freedom when you have people that have differing viewpoints. Who's the leader? Who is the inspiration? How do you get that? That ability to be able to be creative in the characterizations of leaders and the roles that they play was very difficult for me. And at the same time, it really set me free to be able to move in a direction with the Watcher of the Dam that I hadn't expected it to. And that allowed me to take it simply from a point of one character driving all the action to one character leading other characters into their own versions of utopia.
Yeah. In my case, let's say from the point of view of certain villains, they have, of course, everyone has a different version of their utopian ideal, but at least for the bulk of them, it's having others at their beck and call, meaning having slaves, so they can do whatever they want. And in most cases, because these sentients, they are pretty debased. They're quite debased, and then they are destructive, and they like to fight others, just in some cases for no reason, or just to kill them, to conquer them. It's part of their dreamed lifestyle to have slaves. They can have machines, but the machines are expensive. I mean, let's say worker drones and such, they're expensive, and cheap, easily replaceable slave is much. It's not that efficient as the machine, but it's significantly cheaper. And the machine is not like, it does not experience pain. You can't hurt the machine for pleasure. So that's their utopian ideal for most of them. And they wish to achieve it with any means necessary. So, in the case of our protagonists, like you mentioned, they have been raised by people who value the freedom of others and their own freedom, and they're not prepared to simply roll over and allow their futures to be stolen. So, and of course, they are prepared to die. So this is the great clash between the utopian ideals and the dystopian reality of both.
I think there's one aspect in the question, or more so a breakdown of what the question, because dystopia is more than one thing, and I think there's a variety of ways that can explore how a world can fall apart. The first part is correct. The second part is actually not true in a degree. Let me bring it up. This part right here, the world can fall apart. The interesting thing about dystopia is it works better if the world works perfectly fine. In fact, as intended. It's those within the world where they have their culture being apprehended and destroyed. And I think that's one thing. If you really want to build an interesting dystopia, you can start there with how the central and main power actually functions downward, and it usually benefits not only those on top but some towards the middle, because for a dystopia you need that societal will that actually wants it to a good degree. One of the most famous is 1984. That entire society wants this dystopia, and it's only these handful of people that say this isn't the world I want. And that's kind of where you find yourself. It's a dystopia for a few, dystopia for those who practice this culture, but for many others it's lending towards, even if they're completely blinded to the absolute destruction they're causing, it's lending towards something they believe is headed towards a utopia, or in some cases have already achieved. I think another great example is something that we see a lot. It's a simple structure, and that's where you have your slave class and you have your wealthy who benefit from the slavery. That in itself is just the archetypical version of a dystopia. You always have to have those who suffer, who cannot really do much about their suffering, or dare you say, if they do something, it puts a spotlight on them that leads towards destruction. So that's kind of my answer to that. If you the most difficult parts and the most creative parts is in the power dynamic, the society, and in most ways, if it's falling apart, you're actually dealing with more of like a apocalypse than you are a dystopia, because dystopias need to function in some sort of working society, or even if it's not a society that's working but is perceived as working by the masses. So there you go.
Well, I would say that on Sammy, I'm kind of like him in this respect, because I feel like there's different ways it can show up. But once again, we're talking about how I perceive dystopia from my lens, and him, I'm kind of lean towards Sammy's version of it. I like yours though. This is very good, but as sort of the same version that if we're leaning towards the individualist dystopia, and once again, societal dystopian, we're talking about that usually in this sense. But if you're looking at the society of individuals, then you could say that, yes, a world can fall apart literally in that one area. We've seen this happen in the case of civil wars, of places where empires collapse. In the case of the Roman Empire, where you have outposts that are actually doing better in some cases than certain regions where they're under a different structure. So I think in that case, that becomes dystopian in their part, that even though the rest of the society is functioning, there's an element that can go down that presages perhaps the entire collapse of that society. And if you were looking at it from that perspective, then yes, there are different ways a world or a structure, a government can fall apart. It doesn't does it fit under the dystopian model? Is the correct, or does it fit under the invasion or some other thing? We're getting to what is really dystopia. What does it mean? And it's something that is the opposite of utopia. It doesn't work well. It doesn't work well together. And so I'm kind of on the middle on that. I kind of agree with Sammy. I think there's different ways it can go. I think that is the joy of exploring it from a literary standpoint. But when we look at it, and I love what you're saying, James, because it's my son thinks frequently like this. He is a very broad, almost I would say like Crusader Kings or Civilization. When you're playing those games and you play them, there's a very broad societal brush, and you see them from the meta level of how a dystopia can happen, or how utopian systems, how mechanics work in militaristic situations. And so there's a different mindset about it, saying utopia or dystopia from this entirely governmental or structural viewpoint versus a more individualized or balkanized setting, for lack of a better statement. It's everything can look great on the outside, and there's this one area that's falling apart. So I kind of think of it that way too.
I think it's a balancing act, because if you head too much towards everything's crumbling about you, you really are looking more at like an apocalyptic situation. You're in the downfall. You're in the midst of everything crumbling. Something has to be stable in the midst.
There has to be some order. Yeah, some stability, and then like I mentioned earlier, it mirrors what James said, that it's a dystopia, but like it has to have some level of functionality, and otherwise it's going to devolve into complete chaos. Well,
I think that part where it becomes unbelievable. I'm sorry, I was the part where it becomes unbelievable. I think that's what we're trying to avoid. Where here's this villain and everybody's working for them and everybody hates it. Somebody's got to like it, or else it won't.
It's got to be the benefit.
And then in that story that I wrote, like that's these numbers of society, the citizens, they are constantly bombarded by messages and promises, and of course, indeed, a lot of them eventually achieve that like hallowed elite citizen status, that they have like great privileges, they have shiny cybernetic implants, they live longer, but essentially they are just like they cannot leave the city. And in some cases they have limited movement, like they have movement restrictions because they have these movement permits, and they can't leave the area that the movement permit allows them to move about. So yes, they have a lot of many of them love the system because the system is it's almost like God to them, and you have this we will give you this luxury limousine that will travel. You will travel with it from point A to point B, and then we'll give you these luxury clothes and blah blah blah, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the government is so benevolent. Yes, of course I will do everything for my benevolent bureaucratic overlords. Yes, of course I will." And then you have this other group that they actually foresaw that this is not freedom. This is actually all of these things, these items, and these cybernetics and the free quote unquote the free luxury stuff. It's just shackles, and they chose to live in strife without this, but they're free. And the problem is that those who support the system, they cannot see it. That's why they are supporting the system. Slaves of convenience, they say. Slaves of convenience.
I think probably one of the most, not most interesting, but a pretty good dystopia that kind of leads towards a complete and utter downfall. It kind of follows that thing I mentioned earlier, where you start off trying to build a utopia, then it leads you to a dystopia. Is actually the BioShock video game.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Focusing strictly on lore, because people hear video games, they think, oh, mechanics and all this jazz. But lore wise, it's essentially a secluded civilization under the sea that gets apprehended by a drug addiction that just spirals out of control and then leads to absolute and utter chaos and the destruction of civilization due to drug addiction, which I think is very powerful. And I think probably one of the more creative ones I've seen, because they also use the drugs themselves as more of like a mutation of self to give you powers and stuff. But the idea that it's this heavy, carnal, influential thing, and you have those who are addicted to them who can't stop taking them, and then you have those who benefit from it in more than one way. May they be the sellers thereof, or may they be the ones who give it to their forces because it makes them stronger, even though they become addicted to it. And I think that's probably one of the more creative ones I've seen, because a lot of them, I think like 1984 became that dystopian poster child, and a lot of different dystopias kind of follow that political model. But I think for those to kind of stretch their minds on what a dystopia could be, a dystopia is anything that's essentially can threaten a culture or civilization and kind of sinks itself within it, and then the people themselves, the culture themselves, the civilization, the authoritative powers sanction it, and then the people either become slaves to it or cannot escape it.
Ooh, and that actually fits in with two things when you were talking about video games, and Black Knight was talking about his concept of, there's a utopia, it's this wonderful world, then only when you look outside of it do you realize it's not. Fallout 3 is kind of like that. When you start off and you're in the vault itself, it's considered a utopia. You grow up there, it's awesome, everything's cool. It's not until you realize that there are things falling apart behind the scenes that it ceases to be that utopia. As you leave the innocence of being a person that benefits from it, then you realize that somebody is being asked to step up to become this person that must take over this mess that's occurring. And that's when it starts to devolve. And I think that model has been used a lot just because of the popularity, like I said, the popularity of BioShock, the popularity of Half-Life, the popularity of Fallout 3 has lent itself strongly to dystopian elements. But frequently when we see the elements of addiction, whatever kind of addiction it may be, or substance use disorder, whichever you want to call it, being used as a method of creating dystopias when it was supposed to be utopian, it becomes that fulcrum, more or less, of that balance beam, where you have it on either side of it, where here's a drug that can help somebody, can make them feel better, here's something that is meant entirely to enslave the human race. That fulcrum there of biomedical dystopia, and that we don't talk about as much, where people are controlled through, and of course, Black and I mentioned it earlier, and so did you, James, the idea that people can be controlled is it to go out and to take something that they think will make them better, and in reality it's only going to destroy them and the society around them. And that is also part of Watcher the Damned, that we use that, what is considered to be sinful in some parts of the world, in Texas, for instance, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or in this case, drinking and drugs and going for all in the hay, become methods of societal control. And only those who go along with the state are going to have access to those things. And it is constantly pushed by the state that this is part of your recreation. You go and you shoot up a line, or you end up having a drink. The more you do what they say, the more you're going to get. But this has certainly been used in the past to control populations, to make them do what the state wants them to do. And we see that the offer of you can have a sexual partner as long as you do what the state tells you to do. And if you don't, you're going to be denied even access to a dating app. Tell me how that doesn't start to actually creep into our real world when we realize people can be canceled or actually outed online. Don't date this person. Don't do this thing. They've said they're going to vote for someone, or they posted this thing online. That sort of societal control and the pushing of a government to have you start using drugs, to have you start using mind-altering substances, or to drink more, or to do things that they consider to be an opiate of the masses, literally an opiate, certainly is something that is worthy of being explored more, I think, because we have certainly seen that in the past. What people don't realize is even in the 40s and 50s, the reason that cigarettes were given more nicotine, actually, there was, you have just tobacco leaves. I mean, it's tobacco. It's been around for, eternity. Indians, smoked it, and people were pretty cool because they had to grow it. They didn't have like a pack all day long. But then you had, somebody got the bright idea that you can actually use this for a smoke break. You don't have a person going out and wanting to take a walk around the factory. They literally will work for 4 hours for a 15-minute break to go out and smoke a cigarette. If you promise them that, hey, you can go out there and do that, it's a break before payday. You would get a smoke break every day. If you're doing your job right, you're going to be able to go out and go on a smoke break for 15 minutes. Smoke them if you got them. It was part of the military. So you have these elements that have been out there, have been used by governments from time immemorial. A liquor ration, for instance, it was with the British military. But to actually foist it upon a society and to use it as not only a method of getting them to do something for you, but as a method of keeping them under control is certainly something I think that we should be looking more at, perhaps, and maybe just a little bit less of, oh, they're going to force you to do this thing, is they're going to make you want to do it, regardless of whether or not you would ever want it. And if you were sober or in your right mind, they will make you want it, because they will make you become addicted to the things they want you to be addicted to. And that certainly is a heavy, heavy element in Watcher of the Damned.
Or they can say, well, if you do not do what we want you to do or think like we want you to do, no more Soylent Green for you guys and gals. We are shutting it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, no more that nice special like thirst quenching electrolyte liquid that we've been so yeah, it's things like this, like it's not just, it starts with the little things, the things that people thought the people took for granted, like I can just like move freely, or I can talk about pretty much everything. I can meet different people. I can buy everything that I want if I made enough money, of course. And I can travel abroad. I can do this and that, and then they say, oh no, you can't travel abroad. It's dangerous. It's like, we better stay here. Like, don't go to over that country. It's like, it's bad. It's unsafe for you. But we think about your safety. Or don't eat that. You're saving the planet, or something like that. Don't buy that. Don't use that. Don't, like, the moment they start doing this, you've gotta think of your options and realize that, well, maybe while they are building their own utopia, you're swiftly descending deeper and deeper into a horrible dystopia, otherwise known these days as Clown World.
Ooh, I agree with you entirely on this, and I think I was actually listening to all of us, and dystopias are defined differently from age to age, and the term actually comes up in the Greek during the Greek period, classical period. But when we look at it from this perspective, what we consider a dystopia now is a large entity, usually against the individual or a group of individuals. And we see that reflected in our own lives as we feel like we're struggling against these elements out there. Previously, a utopia and a dystopia would be a dystopia is frequently where people were all in lockstep against the utopia. The idea of the government that would be this beautiful place where people could live as in a life that would be considered to be desirable, and a group might come to push that over. The dystopian or the evils would be overthrowing that society. And now, as we look around us, we see most of the time it's a government or a system of power in place that must be toppled in order for us to achieve our own utopias. Because the dystopianism comes from the top down. It's very, very much not a dystopian hellscape because everybody's doing what they want to do. And I think we have to explore that option as well. And it is something that we explore in Watcher of the Damned, where people are out of control, where there isn't an overarching enforcement arm to establish, does a person have a right to live or die? There are places in the world where that is a dystopian way of life, where you literally have anarchy or the power of might, the strongest being those who rule, and those who aren't stronger than they are going to die or be enslaved. That becomes a dystopian society in of itself. It's complete ability to do whatever they want. That's when people long for those societies that are actually able to enforce an ideal and put it into place. And that's how you get that longing for that overarching utopia, where people tell someone to stop doing a thing that's bad, and everybody agrees that thing is bad, and we're not going to do that thing.
That's like that's like the authoritarian rising after the fall, and bring some sense of order, even though it may be a violent, horrific order that is uncomfortable to deal with. It is the only order there is in the land.
The warlord. It's the rise of the warlord is what it is.
Yeah.
As you have chaos, you move to the warlord. And in fact, this is a very common thing, and it's reflected. One of the things I wanted to do with Watcher of the Damned is I wanted to talk about that movement from dystopia under a utopia towards a free state. How does it happen? What are the steps that are taken? What are the challenges that you find along the way? One of those things is the rise of the warlord. And you are going to have warlords when you have this chaos as a utopia or a dystopia falls. You have the rise of people who are stronger, who are able to gather people to be on their side. How do you bring them to a certain place where they all agree that maybe we shouldn't kill each other, or maybe we shouldn't just murder people under us, and let's try to be a stronger entity together? And that's where you start to move towards those federations, those groups of people that become the next great government. And there's a place of chaos. How can that be better approached from if we know we're headed there? If in a story, let's say, because not everything is Hollywood, but not everything is about today. But if we know we're going there in a story, to say it's not just, oh, this is chaos and everybody's going to be horribly unhappy. A lot of times that's the only version we hear, because authors don't know how to wrap their head around a world that is in transition towards a free state without it being horrible. Part of that's reflected because of, if you have a knowledge of the French Revolution, then what happened and how it devolved into a chaotic mess where people were just being killed right and left by a government. And so now you say, well, how do we avoid that as a group of people could? And one of the ways we do that is we actually talk about it in our stories, and we try to say, is there a pathway forward through that valley of the warlords, where these strong men rise up, where sometimes a strong woman will do it. Strong men usually, though, is the warlord, will rise up and they create their own small society, and how will they come together? And I think that's something we haven't explored as much in fiction, and I wanted to go there with it, and so I tried to do that. And I always think of, when I think of Star Shatter, I think of Utopia, actually, and this is me because I love what you did with it. And so the idea that the bunnies and the hamsters are actually the utopian society, that says a lot about me. And so I think about, how do I get there? How do I get to that grand place where where there's an idea of what should be right, And it's going through that valley of negotiating between groups and warlords and people.
And survival.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. That's a heavy line of survival in that period, and some would call it a dark age, actually. But it is the forging ground for freedom.
And with that said, we've hit the hour and a half mark.
Wow,
We wrap
that
it
was
up
a
today.
fast
Yeah,
hour
that
and a
was
half.
It was
great.
a fast one. The good ones aren't fast ones. We may have to retouch on this subject or a similar subject that builds off of this one. But thank you everybody that's watching. If you like the show, we cover the very similar topics, all revolving around world building, lore, literature, every single week. Usually with the same hosts. Please subscribe. Please give us a like. If you have any questions for anybody here, leave them in the comments. We may reply. We may get back to you on another stream. But thank you for joining us. Please join us again next week. We'll be here. If you haven't seen it all, please hit the replay button. And just, thank you for giving us your time. So with that said, we are out of here, people. But first, I was about to hit the end stream button. Let's go ahead and go around. Start with you, RH Snow. Where can people find you?
You can find me at watcherthedam.com, where I'm selling my sci-fi Western saga, post-apocalyptic dystopia versus utopia, Watcher of the Damned. And of course, it is also a romance as well. If you're scared of that, don't worry. There's plenty of action, shooting up stuff, and a bunch of fighting. So it'll take care of you either way. And you can also find me at flow.page/RHSnow, where you can find all of my socials. And I'm, of course, sold at Amazon and all sorts of fine bookstores around. But you can also get my first book, Transmutation Texas, on Kindle Unlimited now. And I do have it there for a limited time. So if you want that on Kindle Unlimited, it'll be limited. Go get it. And it will probably be there certainly as long as you need to have it to read it. And I love all of my readers. Thank you so much, guys out there who are buying my books. Just had another one sell today. So thrilled to have you on board with this wonderful saga. And you guys are the reason I'm able to do it. Readers and viewers like you. And I love all of you out there. And I also love James and Black Knight because they're awesome. Love you.
Mhm.
All right, Black Knight, where can we find you?
Yes. Well, apart from my Substack, which is quite easily found, you just go to Substack and type the Black Knight. You can find my Star Shattered series on Amazon, plus my two story collections, my two anthologies, which have been quite well embraced lately by a number of new readers.
Oh, yes.
And then there are this. I should not say it it's not a spin-off, but it came to be. Veiling the Eltorian came to be because of the success of said anthologies and certain stories in them. And of course, you can also find them on Amazon. And you, as Snow said, we, not just me, not just James, like all of us indies are here because of you guys and gals, because you buy our books and you support us. So have a nice one. And that's from me, James.
All right. I'm currently writing a little novella, but I used to release short stories once a month on my Substack. Right now I'm focusing on this novella, and I might get back to that because that is brutal in itself. But you can find all my stuff at worldwithoutendlore.com as I just continuously expand on my ever-growing project that I am having a ton of fun making. But with that said, we got to get out of here. We want to respect your time. Thank you for joining us. Leave us a like, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think of the show. And with that, bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.